Okay, in this video, we are going to talk about how we can incorporate command line arguments into our programs. So command line arguments are an essential way of being able to provide input from other outside processes or other users. We see it all the time in command line arguments and command line programs that are in use. For example, if you come down here and type ls, right? On Linux, that simply gives you the list of files in a folder. So I have two files in my working folder here. But there's other ways that we can run this program. For example, if I do ls-lah, okay, I get a different mode here. I get the listing, but it's showed to me in more verbose fashion. I've got more details here. And it was these parameters or this command line argument, lah, that allowed me to adjust how the ls utility will behave. It's behaving differently now that I provided those command line arguments. Okay, so very important to be able to provide that data. For example, maybe if you're creating a server that you want to provide perhaps the port number that you want the server to run on, okay, versus having to hard code that in your program. Okay, so we want to create flexible programs and we want to kind of limit the amount of hard coding of values within our program. Hard coding simply means putting the value directly in the source code. Okay, we want to give people the ability to decide how they want their applications or their servers or utilities to run. And that's what command line arguments are all about. Okay, so in this video, we're going to kind of walk through that. Okay, in this video, we are going to talk about how we can incorporate command line arguments into our programs. So command line arguments are an essential way of being able to provide input from other outside processes or other users. We see it all the time in command line arguments and command line programs that are in use. For example, if you come down here and type ls, right? On Linux, that simply gives you the list of files in a folder. So I have two files in my working folder here. But there's other ways that we can run this program. For example, if I do ls-lah, okay, I get a different mode here. I get the listing, but it's showed to me in more verbose fashion. I've got more details here. And it was these parameters or this command line argument, lah, that allowed me to adjust how the ls utility will behave. It's behaving differently now that I provided those command line arguments. Okay, so very important to be able to provide that data. For example, maybe if you're creating a server that you want to provide perhaps the port number that you want the server to run on, okay, versus having to hard code that in your program. Okay, so we want to create flexible programs and we want to kind of limit the amount of hard coding of values within our program. Hard coding simply means putting the value directly in the source code. Okay, we want to give people the ability to decide how they want their applications or their servers or utilities to run. And that's what command line arguments are all about. Okay, so in this video, we're going to kind of walk through that. All right, so in my arguments.js script here that I've got some samples that we're going to walk through. First one is how do we access that data? And it turns out that Node gives us a process object that is globally available to our script. So we can go and look at the process object, and from within that process object, we can interrogate the argv variable. And that simply is an array of arguments coming in from the program. So what I'm doing here is simply just grabbing those arguments and assigning it to a local constant called args. Once I have that local, and you don't have to do this, I could have access to this directly, but it's convenient sometimes to create a little separate little variable or constant. So once I have that, it's very easy for me then to list out and look at what arguments are being provided. Just to kind of show you how this works, so I'm going to go up here and clear this out. And I'm going to run node followed by arguments.js, which is my script. And if I run this, you're going to see that I'm getting a printout here of the arguments that have been provided to the program. Now, I didn't provide any additional arguments. So this is an important thing to understand, that you always are going to be presented with at least two. The first one being node, the actual executable itself, which is running. And what you see there is the node executable and where it actually is stored on your OS. User bin node is where the executable is. So it's running that executable. And the second parameter is going to be the actual script that we are running, okay, which happens to be my arguments.js file. So you're always presented with those first two, okay? Now, any additional ones, for example, if I said, 8,000, perhaps to represent a port, then you'll notice now when I run it, I get that third element in my array of arguments that is my value of 8,000. Okay, and so as many as you put in here, you're going to see them all listed out. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. So we can use this this convenient little array to reach in and grab all the argument data. And now once we have that data, we can then manipulate it the way we need to. I'm going to kind of show you a couple different ways that you can do that. First off is, if you want, since we know that the first two values are always going to be things that are kind of constant. We don't really, maybe don't care to see those. We just really care about the raw arguments. The way I can do that is I can essentially look at that array that was given to me, and I can slice off. The slice function is a function on arrays in Node that allow us to pull off two elements and create a brand new list of off of that, which minus those first two elements. So if I just to kind of demonstrate that, if I go ahead and comment this out and instead I'll comment this one in and run that same program again, you'll see now I'm just simply getting the 8,000. So it's kind of just a convenience. So if you want to just get rid of those first two elements and really deal with quote unquote the real arguments, that's kind of how you could do it. You can use the slice function or method to do that. All right. So let me go ahead and comment that. Let's talk about a couple different ways that we can manipulate this data. Number one is I'm providing you a couple different ways to do this. So since this is an array, we can iterate over that array. And Node gives us a number of different ways to iterate. And again, if you remember, if you've taken other programming classes, which I know some of you have taken Java or Python, the for loop is the predominant way when you have a known, when you want to iterate typically over an array. A for loop is the preferred loop type for that. Okay, so we have a couple different ways we can do that. One is we can use the for each version, which is, I'll comment that and kind of see what that looks like. So essentially there's a for each method of an array. And what that'll do is that'll allow us to iterate over all the elements in whatever array we're looking at. And we can get the argument value and the index within the array. So you have access to both. And if I ran this script, I would get the values printed out along with their index within the array. So let me go ahead and clear this and kind of show you what that looks like. All right, so there you go. So I've got one argument here. If I run this again and put in, I don't know, verbose, right now I would get two arguments, okay, with that. So you have, actually, I'm going to make sure I put space in between these. There you go. Okay, so I have a space there. So there's my two arguments. So you can iterate over all your arguments that are passed in, and that's the number one way, is using the for each approach. And again, it's really up to you which one makes the most sense, whichever one you feel comfortable with. There's also a enhanced for loop, which kind of looks very similar to the for each, except it doesn't have access to the index. So it's another way to iterate over and get the values out that way. And then there's also going to be the old-fashioned, I call it old-fashioned, this is the kind of traditional for loop that you might have seen in Java or C++ languages that have this format here where it iterates using a more kind of verbose formatted loop. Either one works. I'll keep this one just to kind of show you that they behave exactly the same way. So you get the same value. So totally up to you, but you're going to definitely want to iterate over the values to determine what to do with these arguments once you have them. All right, let's look at a couple different scenarios. One is a lot of times you might want to have arguments that are in name value pair or key value pair. For example, if I clear this out, and let me go ahead and close this here. Oops, bring up my terminal again. All right, let me go ahead and clear this out. And if I go back up and I type node, actually go back to my folder part, apologize there. All right. If I type node arguments, actually I'm gonna use the arguments. All right. And instead of doing 8,000, like I was doing in that first example, you might want to do something like port equal 8,000, right? So you have a name value pair. So that would be one option you might want to have. So you can use this format and you can then hit enter, and you'll see that you can parse it into its name and its value. So that's a pretty common way of passing not only individual values, but what type of setting are you trying to control. In this case, I'm trying to control the port number. Okay, and maybe there's port number, maybe there is debug equal true, something like that, right? So you want to be able to provide a lot of different types of command arguments, and name value pair or key value pair is a convenient way to do that. And all we're doing here is iterating over the arguments, and we're using the split operator to split on that equal sign. Okay, so it's basically splitting it out. On the left of the equal sign is going into the actual key, and what's on the right hand side is going into the value. So port is the key, and the value is 8,000, just as an example. So that's all the split does, is says look at a specific character. When you see that character, that's where you're going to split and create two different pieces, so that are going to be put into those two constants, and then you have that data, and you can do that for every different value coming into your command line. All right, so that's key value pair approach. That's possible. All right, next one is sometimes you want to have flags. So if I kind of uncomment this and kind of show you how that would look. And so here we're saying we're not going to use, perhaps not going to use this approach, but maybe we want to have a flag that sets the verbose on, or the debug on, or help something turn on. So we can do it that way using something like this. All right, so if I hit enter on this, you'll see that I've iterated over my values here, and I'm checking for specific known flags. My program knows how to support verbose, and my program knows how to support help. And if you don't see them, then the flags stay false. This is actually just a constant object keeping track of all of my flags. And then so you can kind of see, since I passed verbose here, I'm essentially turned on that flag, but I left help off because I did not provide the help flag. But if I did that again and typed help, then you'd see that both flags are turned on. And that's kind of how you can use command line arguments to pass in and create flags, true false flags, Boolean flags, to turn on or turn off functionality within your program. Okay. All right, now, next thing I want to do is we're going to go walk through a quick little real world sample program to kind of show you how those would look in a simple node server.